Texas coach Steve Sarkisian is not a very interesting nor charismatic personality. That's not a great way to start, I know, but there's a lot of this that is interesting. In fact, it's fascinating. In his defense, the coaching profession, when you think about it overall, really doesn't have many, if any, I guess we could say, maybe I can think of one or two off the top of my head, coaches that are charismatic and interesting. Mike Leach may have been the last. Coached at Texas Tech and Mississippi State, died a couple years ago. It's a world of Mike McCarthy's. It's a world of Kyle Shanahan's. It's a world of Steve Sarkisian's. It's just not. Coaching personalities really don't exist anymore. I have a theory why that is. So I'm saying that because Steve Sarkisian acts publicly like most other coaches. Mike McDaniel, I would say, the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, the nerdy coach of the Dolphins, is practically alone in terms of personality of the coaching world. He's quirky, he's funny, but there really aren't any others at the highest level. Because it's funny when you think about it, coaching personalities. You know, you used to have these bizarre, over-the-top personalities. It was tolerated. It was almost encouraged. But it's funny, with all the money and popularity now in college football and the NFL, charismatic coaches at the highest level just don't exist. And I would argue, I don't know if there's any way to prove this, but it seems like it fits. I would argue that the reason they're boring and just not the way they used to be, it's discouraged, in fact. I would say it's mostly because of two guys. That the coaching act, the public act of a coach now is following in the footsteps of Bill Belichick and Nick Saban. Coaches have learned how to lay low, say very little, be really, really sloppy. You know, the look is, I've been at the office all night long, or I've been sleeping on the couch, that kind of look, and win. And that's all it is. And I think that comes from Belichick. I think it comes from Nick Saban. It's you want to look like a gym rat and not say anything publicly because you can make a lot of money as long as you win. You know, personality doesn't really matter anymore. In fact, I think it's discouraged. So it can work. I mean, you just win and it works just fine. But it's boring. But Steve Sarkisian's path, the head coach at Texas, his path is interesting. In fact, I think you could argue it's astonishing, really. When you think about it, it is astonishing. Now, you don't pick it up. You don't hear about it. You probably don't even talk about it much because it's just, you're feeding off of the personality and there's not a whole lot there. But, man, when you peel away at that guy's career, it really is pretty remarkable. It's fascinating. And to his credit, man, the dude was down and out. So you would say, well, Jeff, why are you talking about Steve Sarkisian? One, it's June. Two, if he's boring. And the answer is he did an interview yesterday, day before. I don't know when the interview was shot. But I watched it all. And, you got to stick with it. But there are highlights there that are fascinating. And I think it's a fascinating path the guy has been on. And he brings up, and I can help make this even more interesting, there's this cross-section of this guy's career that's pretty remarkable. And so I can do this. Along his path, I can easily talk about 5 to 6 things that are pretty fascinating. Among them, his sobriety, which he did talk about, which you don't hear about publicly very often, but I got to give the guy credit. He didn't hide this in this interview, and it's really fascinating and inspirational. His sobriety, which I don't think many people know about, his problems, working for people rarely think about this. The man has worked for 2 of the most famous coaches of modern football, 2 of the most successful in modern football. He has been a part of, a very important part of, one of the 2 most important plays in Texas football history. Yes. I mean, just the way this guy's career has been weaving through interesting stuff, makes it conversational worthy. And then there's the issue of NIL and what he said about NIL, which would make you throw up on your shoes a little bit. And then there's the issue of, okay, where's the guy going to end up? I mean, is there a job better than Texas? The answer is no. But there is a chance, there's a weird chance I could see the guy ending up in the NFL. So I can work in all of those things that I think make it relatable to the average person. When Sarkisian, he's not a dumb guy, but a chance. I mean, he's well spoken. It's just that the industry of today is to be understated. That's the job, even when you're rich. So, he's a guy that was calling plays for USC when they were chasing a three-peat before Texas beat them. He's a head coach at Washington by, mid-30s, I think. He then goes to USC. He gets whacked. All the while, he's an alcoholic that, in the coaching profession, made him untouchable. It was an epic flameout. Nick Saban hires him, and not only did Nick Saban pick the guy up out of the coaching trash at that time, this is a young guy who was flaming out. He saved his life. I mean, he didn't just work for Saban. He wasn't just brought back to coaching life by Saban. Saban saved his life. See, Sarkisian, apparently, there's only one other time I've read this story, and he doesn't make reference to it much. Like I said, I think most of what coaches do now is just lay low, don't talk a whole lot, and go with the flow and make a lot of money if you win. Sarkisian had some sort of undetected heart condition, and Saban apparently is a health nut. And he requires intensive physicals for everyone that works in the department, everyone who works for him. And it was during one of those required intense physicals that reportedly Sarkisian's heart problem was detected. He was dead man walking by every description. So the condition is discovered. He has open heart surgery. This is a young guy. Again, he's already been through a lot by that time. I mean, he's flamed out at two big-time places, and Saban is now giving him coaching life and then saving his life. So, of course, Alabama under Saban has, historic success. Texas is struggling at the time under Charlie Strong. Texas whacks Charlie Strong for good reason. It wasn't good enough. They pay him off. And then I think it's safe to say Texas ends up settling. They would never say this. He would never say this. He wouldn't want to say this. But they settle because Texas had been struggling. Texas probably had, at the time Sarkisian was hired, had been thinking two people, Nick Saban or Urban Meyer. And then they end up with Steve Sarkisian. And he's sober. He's healthy. This is when he gets the gig at Texas. He's sober and he's healthy, and he stumbles into the most lucrative program in all of sports. Nobody outspends him. He finds his way back from getting whacked, the trash heap, dead man walking, to the Texas job, which is a pot of gold. Nobody pays more. Nobody gives out more. Texas money is the gift that keeps giving. Sarkisian goes meh in his first year. He seems, it seems doubtful that he lasts. And then last year, they win the Big 12. They get into the Final Four. He gets a new deal. And, now with this new deal, even if he flames out over the years at Texas, money will never be an object again. Right? Here's a guy who's just weaved his way through a pretty reckless and interesting life to come back where money is not going to be an object again. No matter what happens in a flame out of Texas, if there was, and I don't think it's possible to flame out of Texas at this point, in this environment where it's about money. But money will never be an object again for him. So he goes from getting fired twice as an alcoholic, having now the best job in all of sports. And I'll put it this way, the Texas job is the most advantageous job, coaching job in sports. Nowhere else do you have the advantage you have at Texas. Certainly now. So think about that. He ends up at Texas. He's the head of a program that will do and spend anything, and nobody can match them. he should have huge success at Texas. There's no excuse not to have huge success at Texas because it's a cash game. Okay, so that's kind of a setup here. So then in this interview, I think it was with Joel Klatt of Fox Sports, he talks about NIL. NIL is it's paying mercenaries to play football. They're football mercenaries. He would not say this. I would say it. He talks about NIL, and he makes reference to NIL. NIL is the cash handed out to players. Okay, that's it. Don't pretend that it's an advertising deal. It's not. It's not an image deal. It's not. It's not a transaction. It's just cash given. Cash and prizes given to players. That's the environment now. His answer was nice. His answer will also make you throw up on your shoes.
In this environment, how do you grow, also adapt to not be a dinosaur, and succeed even with these things that he was talking about?
Well, I think this. I think, one, why did you choose to come to Texas? Right? And there's a formula to that. If you lead with NIL to get a young man to come to your school,
then that's why I came there.
Then a year from now, what's he going to ask about first? NIL. And so our kind of perspective on this and our approach to this is we've got an amazing product here. The history and tradition of Texas football is second to none. The education, the quality of education at UT is incredible. The coaching staff we have, the development of our players, the trajectory of what we've done from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 of our program, the city of Austin, all these things that we're talking about, that's why I want you to come to the University of Texas. NIL doesn't come up. That should be the last reason to choose to go to a school, whether it's Texas or any other school. Because if you take players predicated off of NIL, that you want them so bad that you're willing to go to whatever length and whatever degree to get that kid from an NIL perspective, of course that's what he's going to talk about the very next year when you bring him into your office.
Okay.
And so we try to create a...
Yeah, look. That's nice. That's why I went to Texas. Okay, man. Okay. Remember, this is a program with a parking lot. No joke. A parking lot of Lamborghinis. That's nice. That's a great pitch. It worked on me when I was a kid, when I was coming up. But come on, man. It's the right thing to say. I don't think it's all that realistic. No. Look, all that stuff about Texas and Austin worked just fine. I can preach about that stuff. But come on. You hand out Lamborghinis. All right, whatever. I mean, it's, what else do you expect him to say? But his answer about the discussion they had about sobriety was interesting. And a lot of people can relate, no doubt. When and where to share it, how often to share it. But he makes a really good point. He may have wanted to hide it. I don't know that he did. But even if he did, he's saying, listen, don't you think people are going to use that against me when they're recruiting a player? And he's exactly right. So the guy had no option except to own it and own it publicly. And his response is pretty inspirational.
I'm coming up on 13 years sober. You're also sober. That was a huge shift in my life and a commitment that I had to make. How open was I going to be about it? You've had to make that same choice. How'd you make that decision?
So it really wasn't like something that I could hide from. This is public knowledge. This is public information. I'm a public figure at this point. I quickly realized in coaching, there's this thing called negative recruiting. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, Joel, but some coaches love to talk about another school or another coach. Other schools and other coaches were going to try to use that against me. And so I really became open, honest, and vulnerable with the recruits first to talk through my story, because I always felt like 18 to 22-year-old males, if there's a guarded group of individuals in our society, it's that group, right? Being vulnerable, being open, being honest, not at the top of the priority list for a lot of young men. So how do I get them to feel comfortable to do that? Well, why don't I share? Uncut, but it's the version that they're sitting in their chairs thinking, I can't believe Coach Sark just said all that to us. I've given them a platform to say it's okay to be vulnerable, to open up. We're all just looking to support one another. Every year I do it. And there's some guys that sit in that team room that have sat in there for 3-4 years now and heard the same story. I've told that story last summer. My own son was sitting in that room. And now what happens is there's some empathy. I know what you're going through. If you look a little off today, I have something to tap into. In the end, I think that really did draw us closer. But every year you have to recreate it, right? I lose 25, 30 guys. And here comes a new batch of 25, 30 guys. And how do we get them back into our culture? How do we get them to understand it's okay to talk about what's going on in our lives? And Coach Sark's actually here to help you. He's not here to look for what's wrong with you so that he can cut you and move on to the next kid.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that is. And he's right. I mean, he's flaming out in an epic way at a young age. And it was highly publicized. So, I mean, I credit the guy for owning it and getting in front of it the entire time. I think that's... I mean, look, I don't think anybody wants to talk about anybody that's been there wants to talk about it all the time. But the fact that he, I think it's a smart move to go there with his players. I think it probably works. I think it's pretty cool. Here's a guy, if you name in the modern era, the most successful coaches, okay, if you just rattle them off, you're going to end up with Bill Belichick. You're going to end up with Urban Meyer. You're going to end up with Pete Carroll. And you're going to end up with Nick Saban. And I'm not sure you go beyond that list. He's worked for 2 of them. He's called plays for 2 of them. I mean, let that sink in. He's called plays at a young age for the two of the 3. Urban Meyer's out of it. Belichick by force is out of it. Now Pete Carroll and Nick Saban get out the exact same time, I believe on the same day. But he called plays for the 2 of the 3 biggest names in modern coaching.
Speaking of leadership, you have, I don't want to say just like fortunate, but in your gratitude tree, I'm sure there's like, I got to coach under Pete Carroll and I got to coach under Nick Saban and be with the Falcons and Matt Ryan. You've gotten to coach great players, coach under great coaches, but specifically 2 guys that just stepped away. Yeah. Pete Carroll, Nick Saban. They step away on basically the same day. Same day. And those are, I would have to imagine, please correct me if I'm wrong, the most influential coaching influences in your career.
Hands down.
What did each of them bring to you? Crazy
to think. Like, I would say this, in my era of coaching, the 3 greatest of all time, right? If you put Coach Saban, Coach Carroll, and Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right? I mean,
most successful,
that era,
certainly.
Right? And those guys in their organizations that they were part of. The biggest thing I got from those 2, dramatically different personalities. Here's Pete Carroll. He's bouncing around. He's chewing gum. He's playing catch every day. He's got his gloves on. He's creating an environment of energy, and the guys are flying around. Here's Nick Saban. It's like the methodical regiment, the discipline of this is how we're going to go about our business, and this is the approach. Okay? But in the end, they're both striving for the exact same thing, which is being champions. They're both highly competitive, 2 of the most competitive humans I've ever been around, and they're both extremely successful. But what I came to find out in my time, having been with Coach Carroll, then I get back with Coach Saban, and asking those questions were, if you look at their careers, the second half of their careers is when they really took off.
Yeah, well, I would argue way more successful than the first.
Not even close, right? Both of them right around 50. And then the last 20, 22 years, they're both 72, have been the greatest years of their careers. Well, why is that? What happened? And so I asked them both the exact same question and really got the exact same answer. They figured out who they were. And then they coached who they were rather than trying to be something that they're not. And because when you try to be something you're not, when adversity strikes, the real you comes out, and then everybody around you like, who the hell's that guy? Like, that's not who he was yesterday and the day before, but all of a sudden, here's this guy that comes out. And I think that, for me, was probably the biggest thing because, remember, I was 34 years old. I was the head coach at University of Washington. I didn't know what the heck was going on. One day I was like this, the next day I was like this. I was, at that time, and I use this analogy, I was a thermometer. I was walking into whatever the situation was, whatever the temperature was, that's how I responded. And I've gotten to now, I'm a thermostat. I set that temperature for how I want it to be every day, and then others can either buy into that temperature or not. And so if you figure out who you are and then you try to act in accordance to who you are as consistently as possible so everybody knows what to expect. And I think that's the beauty of having the opportunity to work for those two guys. They're drastically different, but they figured out who they were. Pete Carroll wasn't following Bill Parcells in New England anymore, trying to be, like, how do I be Bill Parcells but still be Pete Carroll? He didn't have to do that anymore, right? Nick Saban figured out who he was. I see so many coaches now that left those trees of those two guys that tried to be Pete Carroll, tried to be Nick Saban, and failed miserably because they weren't trying to be themselves, but still hold on to some of the premises of the things that were really good in that program. And like I said, I feel like I've been fortunate to work for two amazing men in our sport that have been tremendous, and the life lessons I learned from them well beyond football that I've been able to apply, but apply in a way that fits me, so there's a consistency to the approach that I give every day.
All right, so that's, I mean, he's right, though. Pete Carroll's fired a couple times early on, picks up USC off the ground. Saban had been whacked a couple of times and whacked by the Dolphins. Well, so, yeah, pretty much. Been whacked by the Dolphins. It's a great observation, man. I mean, they had their success later in life in their coaching career. All right, so the other thing he mentioned is, this is nerdy football stuff, but it's fascinating. Here's the setup. The two most famous plays in Texas football history are, one, a 44-yard pass play on 4th and 3 from the Texas 43, I think I'm getting this right, to beat Arkansas 15-14 in a game that was called the game of the century. It was the only game on TV that day, and the President of the United States, with issues, plenty of issues, guess who that was? The President of the United States is there. Texas beats them. That's one of the two most famous plays in Texas football history. The second most famous play is not the most important play. That's Vince Young taking off and scoring on a 4th and 5, down 5 to USC with 30 seconds left in the game to give Texas the win in the national championship. That's one of the two most famous plays, but it's not the most important play. And Sarkisian was very much a part of the most important play. Very much. That's where he comes in. He's calling the plays for Pete Carroll at USC. The game is over. If USC converts on a 4th down play. And I'll tell you something interesting about this. And this is the most important play. It's not the famous play. And it came up, and it's come up a few times now. And what Sarkisian says about his play call is pretty interesting. Because I asked Mac Brown, I think it may have been the night Texas won that game, and many times after. Mac Brown's the head coach at Texas at the time. And so it is 4th, I don't think it's 2, but whatever. They say 4th and 2. And I asked Mac Brown, because Texas wasn't able to stop USC defensively much at all. USC wasn't able to stop Texas defensively at all. And I said, okay, you're facing 4th and 2. What's the mindset? And he said, it was clear. We sold out for the run. We completely sold out for the run. We threw all 11 where we thought the play was going. And I said, well, gosh, what if USC fakes, they run play action, dump the ball off? His answer was, that guy would still be running. There was no one that was going to cover anybody had USC run a pass play. There was no chance had USC run wide that Texas would have stopped them, and he admitted it. He said we had no choice but to throw people where we did. What's interesting is Sarkisian says he regrets the play call. Because if USC converts, it's a three-peat for USC in its history. Now, later on, of course, suspension, they end up forfeiting the games, but, who knows where that goes. So they don't convert. And there's no way that USC is stopping Texas and Vince Young. And what's funny is Sarkisian says he was asked about regretting play calls because he's been calling plays for a long time. And he says, yeah, I know exactly what it was. 4th and 2, USC playing Texas in the national championship game. It's 38-33. It's 2:13 left. It would be the first team in 70 years to three-peat. USC needed to pick up 2 yards, really more like a yard and a half at the most, from the Texas 44. He chose not to have Reggie Bush. He chose not to have Reggie Bush on the field, gave the ball to Lindell White, and he said, yeah, I regret it. The funny thing is it was the right play call. I mean, it's now you hear Mac Brown's side of it, you hear Steve Sarkisian's side of it. It's exactly right. Had Sarkisian decided to do something else, they win. They win. And the Vince Young play is not talked about, and it's a three-peat, sort of, except they would have ended up forfeiting. But I was fascinated by that. Now, I mean, it was the right call. Look, Texas hadn't stopped a guy at 119 or 20 yards rushing. It was the right thing to do. I mean, look, if you can run the ball successfully, never, ever make the game complicated. If you can run the ball successfully, you just keep running it. And that's what he did. It didn't work on that particular play, and it's pretty amazing. He said he now regrets it. But for him to be in that spot, when you think about it, is, again, that's this amazing path this guy has taken. What happens to him at Texas? Would he leave Texas? One, you don't leave Texas for any other college job. That would be shocking. There is no better job. There is no better setup. There is no better money. The only question is, what about the NFL? And I got a theory about that because the NFL is not going to want college coaches. There's very few college coaches that, one, ever make it, and two, why would the NFL now really want and need them? It doesn't work often enough. But I do have a theory, a weird theory about this, that would Sarkisian, could he flame out at Texas? Yeah, sure. But remember, he's set for life financially now. Could he flame out? Could he leave Texas for another college coaching job? That would be crazy. That would be hard to see. There's just not a better gig. It just doesn't exist. But leaving Texas, even Texas, for the NFL would make sense. It's the ultimate challenge. You've made your money. It's not like you're going to get underpaid in the NFL. And you get a chance to do the best. And he's already been in the NFL, so I could see it. But only under this circumstance, because the NFL is not going to want college coaches. They don't need them. And usually it doesn't work. But the only, in my opinion, the only college coaches, the guys that could make a jump, an owner would take a risk. An NFL owner would take a risk on a quarterback whisperer. That's what an owner would do. Owners are enamored with quarterbacks, obviously. Owners are completely married to the idea that as the quarterback goes, so goes my franchise. And so I think it's possible that an owner, now and in the next few years, could be fascinated by a coach who gets the reputation as building great quarterbacks. Lincoln Riley is first, except what he's done at USC is underachieving. They play zero defense, but he is known as a quarterback whisperer. So I wouldn't be shocked if there was some owner who's enamored with it. I don't think it'll work, but the owners will think, wait a minute, if he had him, and Lincoln Riley's resume is ridiculous, then I just need him to come in here and coach another quarterback, and it's all going to work out. These are the only way I see guys jumping from the college game to the NFL. So how does that relate to Sarkisian? And I don't even know that he would leave Texas for the NFL if it came up, and this is a big if. What's the situation that could make him marketable to the NFL? Okay. He's going to have a first-round pick most likely coming into this year's draft. That's Quinn Ewers. It's a slow quarterback cycle, but Ewers has put up numbers. Ewers has played a lot of football. Ewers is probably high profile. So an NFL team is going to want him, and I'm going to probably want him in the first round. So he's going to have that resume. He's going to have that to build upon. And I could see a setup. I could see an owner finding this really cool. If Arch Manning were to come along, have huge success, it's highly popular, it is football royalty. And it looks like, wow, this Sarkisian dude who's been in the NFL has now got 2 quarterbacks. He's becoming the quarterback whisperer in that kind of setup. If there were that kind of success with a Manning and the name, I could see an owner. I could see an owner then making that offer. I'm not quite sure he would take it, but that's the kind of setup that would get a guy to leap from the college game to the pro game. It's only going to come via offensive guys and who are successful with quarterbacks. And he could be that. The name Manning, the 2 of them together could mean a lot to an NFL owner. Otherwise, I wouldn't see him leaving, unless he were forced out because he flames out of Texas, which is tough to do when you've got all the money. It's an interesting path, though, the guy. He doesn't sell it that well publicly because he doesn't want to sell it that well publicly because he doesn't have to sell it that well publicly, and it's a boring profession. But you can't say his path has not been fascinating.